The crystalline spires of Cathara Prime sang their death song across the void, a melody so haunting it made Commander Jin Park's soul ache. He sat in his cramped monitoring station at the edge of human space, fingers dancing across controls that hadn't seen an upgrade in decades. Earth couldn't afford the fancy equipment the other species used. They made do with what they had. The sound coming through his speakers was unlike anything he'd ever heard. Jin had spent 20 years listening to space chatter, trade negotiations, weather reports, the usual boring stuff that kept the galaxy running. But this was different. This was pure terror, given voice through living crystal, screaming across the darkness between stars. "Sir, you need to see this," Lieutenant Soo Kim called from her station. Her young face looked pale in the blue glow of her screens. "We're getting the same signal from 17 different star systems. It's coming from everywhere the Cathara live." Jin pushed back from his desk and walked over to Soo's workstation. The walls of their small outpost were covered with old Earth military patches and photos of home, reminders of what they were protecting out here in the cold emptiness of space. Most alien species thought humans were crazy for volunteering to work in such isolated places. Maybe they were right. "What are we looking at?" Jin asked, though his stomach already told him he didn't want to know. Soo's hands shook as she brought up the transmission data. "It's not just audio, sir. There's video embedded in the crystal songs. The Cathara there sharing what's happening to them. The footage that appeared on their screens was nightmare fuel. Beings made of living crystal, their bodies catching and bending light in ways that hurt to look at, were being systematically murdered. The attackers wore heavy armor and carried weapons that looked like oversized hammers. But these weren't regular hammers. They vibrated with sonic energy, designed specifically to shatter crystal." "The Vorthok hegemony," Jin whispered, recognizing the armor design from intelligence briefings. "They're really doing it. They're wiping out an entire species." The alien screams weren't just sounds. They carried emotions, memories, the desperate thoughts of billions of beings facing extinction. Jin had fought in Earth's wars, the bloody conflicts in the Pacific, the rebellion on Mars, where human fought human among red rocks and thin air. He thought he'd seen the worst of what thinking beings could do to each other. He was wrong. "Send this to Earth Command," Jin ordered, his voice barely steady. "Priority Alpha transmission. Someone back home needs to see this." "What should I tell them?" Soo asked. Jin watched another crystal family die on the screen. "Tell them the galaxy is watching genocide happen, and nobody's lifting a finger to stop it." Ambassador Li Wan straightened his formal diplomatic robes one last time before entering the massive chambers of the Galactic Council. The building itself was a marvel. Floating crystals provided light, anti-gravity platforms carried delegates between levels, and the walls displayed real-time data from across known space. It was meant to inspire awe and respect for galactic civilization. Today, it just made Li sick. He took his seat in the section reserved for junior species, a polite way of saying the races nobody really cared about. Around him, the great powers of the galaxy conducted their business with the casual efficiency of beings who had been running things for thousands of years. The Altarian delegate was speaking, its insect-like head tilting as multiple mandibles clicked together to form words. "The Republic expresses our deepest concern for the ongoing situation in Cathara space," it said, the translator making its voice sound appropriately solemn. "However, our sacred principles of non-interference prevent us from taking direct action." Li's tablet showed the latest casualty reports. 3 months ago, 8 billion Cathara had been singing their crystal songs across dozens of worlds. Now fewer than 200 million remained alive. While the Council talked, entire planets had gone silent. "The Centauri Federation stands with our Altarian friends," announced another delegate, this one resembling a cross between a dolphin and a tree. "Military intervention would set a dangerous precedent. We must consider the broader implications for galactic stability." More clicking of mandibles, more solemn nodding, more careful diplomatic language that meant absolutely nothing while people died. Lee couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, knowing that junior species weren't supposed to speak without permission. Every eye in the chamber turned toward him, some curious, others annoyed at the breach of protocol. "What about the trade agreements?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "The Vorthok hegemony controls mining rights in 47 systems. They supply rare metals to half the species in this room. Is that why we're debating committee structures while children are being murdered?" The chamber fell completely silent. Even the floating crystals seemed too dim. Lee could feel the weight of 1,000 years of galactic tradition pressing down on him, demanding that he sit down and shut up like a good little primitive. The Altarian delegate's mandibles clicked with obvious irritation. "The Earth representative forgets his place in these proceedings. Your species has barely mastered faster-than-light travel. Perhaps it would be wise to leave complex galactic politics to those with actual experience." Lee looked around the chamber, at all these experienced politicians, these wise and ancient species who had watched genocide happen for 3 months while forming study committees, experience in watching innocents die while counting profits. "You mean," he said quietly. He walked out while they voted to form another committee to study the situation. "Captain." Min Choi pushed off from the bulkhead and floated through the zero-gravity command center of the Earth defense ship, INCH. The ship hummed around her with the steady vibration of human engineering, not the silent elegance of alien vessels, but something built to last. Thick armor plating, redundant systems, and radiation shielding that could handle anything space threw at them. That's what happened when you came from a planet that tried to kill you every day. "Captain, you need to hear this," called Communications Officer Ho Jung from his workstation. His fingers danced across displays that looked crude compared to alien technology, but they worked. That was all that mattered to humans. Did it work? When everything else failed. Min drifted over to Ho's station, grabbing a handhold to steady herself. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the rest of their small patrol fleet, 8 ships total, looking like flying bricks compared to the graceful curves of Galactic Council vessels. Every other species in space had ships that looked like art. Humans built theirs to survive. "What do you have?" Min asked. Ho's eyes were bright with excitement. "The Cathera transmissions. I've been running pattern analysis on them for weeks. At first I thought they were just songs, you know? Emotional expressions, cries for help. But look at this." He brought up a holographic display showing wave patterns and mathematical sequences. There are mathematical structures hidden in there. Music, star charts, fleet positions, defensive arrangements. The crystal beings aren't just screaming, they're sharing tactical information. They're still trying to coordinate resistance. Min studied the data, her mind already working through the implications. They're still fighting. What's left of them, yes. But Captain, Ho's voice grew heavy. The numbers are bad. Maybe 50 million survivors scattered across 12 systems. 3 months ago, there were 8 billion. The bridge fell quiet, except for the hum of machinery. Min looked at her crew, young humans who had volunteered for patrol duty at the edge of known space. Earth couldn't afford to send its best ships or most experienced officers this far out. They made do with what they had, like always. "The Vorthok are being systematic," Ho continued. "They're not just killing, they're erasing. No witnesses, no survivors, no evidence. If we hadn't been monitoring these frequencies..." Min turned to look through the viewport again. Out there, an entire species was dying while the galaxy's great powers held committee meetings. The Altarians had their non-interference protocols. The Centauri's worried about precedent. Everyone had reasons why they couldn't act, but humans had something different. They had grown up on a world where you helped your neighbors, or everyone died, where standing by and watching wasn't an option. "Plot a course for Earth," Min ordered. "Maximum speed," Captain Ho asked. It's time someone asked the hard questions. President, nah. Sol stood at the reinforced windows of her office, looking out over the sprawling Seoul metroplex. The city stretched to the horizon, millions of lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Down there in the research districts, humanity's best minds worked around the clock, trying to decode alien transmissions and make sense of technologies they barely understood. Through those same windows, she could see the memorial wall, black, stone etched with thousands of names from the Martian independence, or each name represented someone who had died because good people waited too long to act. Na had been a colonel then, young and idealistic. She'd learned hard lessons about the cost of hesitation. Madam President, Admiral Tae-yoon's voice cut through her thoughts. He entered with Commander Jin Park beside him. Jin looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, his uniform wrinkled and his eyes haunted. Months of listening to an entire species die would do that to a person. We've received the final transmission from Cathara Prime, the Admiral said quietly. Na turned from the window as a holographic display filled the center of the room. What she saw there broke something inside her chest. Crystal, children, beings, no larger than human toddlers, sat in the ruins of their world, their small bodies glowing with soft inner light. They were singing what could only be a lullaby, their voices creating harmonies that human ears weren't designed to process. Around them, armored figures moved through the rubble. Vorthok soldiers, methodical in their cruelty. They weren't using their sonic weapons for quick kills. They were taking their time, making it hurt. The sounds that emerged from dying crystal beings created notes so haunting that two of Na's aides rushed from the room, hands over their ears. Turn it off, Na said after a moment that felt like eternity. The Galactic Council, she asked, though her tone made it clear she already knew the answer. Admiral Tae's laugh was bitter as old coffee. They voted to impose economic sanctions. In 18 months? After a committee spends a year studying whether sanctions might be effective, Na Sol had fought her way up through the ranks during humanity's bloodiest conflicts. She'd made the hard choices when others froze. That's why. The people had elected her, not for her diplomacy, but for her spine. What's our fleet status, Admiral? 47 ships, combat ready. The Seoul, Busan, and Daegu battle groups are currently on rim patrol. Na looked again at the memorial wall, at all those names of people who died because someone waited too long. Bring them home, she said, quietly. And Admiral, start preparing for a very long journey. The emergency session of Earth's Defense Council took place 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, in reinforced bunkers that had sheltered humanity's leaders through 2 world wars and the solar system conflicts. The walls were lined with monitors showing Earth's cities, its colonies, and the vast emptiness of space where human ships patrolled alone. Admiral Tae-yoon stood before the holographic assembly, his dress uniform showing the wear of a career spent in Earth's service. Scars from the Mars Rebellion crossed his left temple, and his right hand bore burn marks from the Europa Station incident. These weren't politicians making this decision, they were people who had bled for humanity's survival. The situation is clear, Tae reported, his voice carrying the weight of bad news. The Altarian Republic contacted our embassy directly. Any military intervention in Cathara space will trigger immediate economic sanctions. They're talking about cutting off our access to galactic trade networks, freezing technology transfers, even military action if we destabilize the region. Defense Minister Yubin shifted in her chair, her weathered face showing the stress of sleepless nights. What about working around them? Covert operations. Support through other species. Commander Jin Park looked up from his communications console, where alien voices still whispered through the speakers. There's nobody to work with, Minister. The Kithara are completely pacifist. They've never developed weapons, never built armies. Their entire culture is based on harmony and trust. His voice cracked slightly. They actually believed someone would help them. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of Geneva traffic far above. Then a new transmission filled the room, not the screams of terror they'd grown accustomed to, but something infinitely worse. Children's voices, crystal beings barely old enough to understand what death meant, singing lullabies in languages humans couldn't pronounce. Their voices grew fainter with each verse. President Na Sol stood slowly, her hands resting on the conference table that had seen humanity through its darkest hours. Around her, faces waited, generals who had fought alien raiders, scientists who had unlocked the secrets of space travel, diplomats who had negotiated humanity's place among the stars. "I've read every analysis," she said. "Military intervention means risking everything we've built. Our children might grow up cut off from galactic society, struggling with outdated technology, facing economic collapse." She looked at each person in the room, her gaze steady. "But if we stand by and watch genocide happen, what kind of people are we raising? What does it say about us as a species?" Her voice hardened. "Admiral Tay, you have operational command. Bring our fleet home." The vote was unanimous. Admiral Tay Yoon gripped the railing of the EDS asterisk, Sol asterisk's bridge as reality snapped back into focus around them. 47 human warships had just completed the longest military jump in Earth's history, arriving in the Lyra 7 system in perfect formation. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see the horror they'd come to stop: entire crystal cities, burning like massive torches across the planet's surface. The bridge around him was cramped and functional, built for war rather than comfort. Every surface was covered with manual controls and backup systems, because humans had learned the hard way that fancy technology failed when you needed it most. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, their faces grim but determined. "Sir, we're detecting 18 Vorthok heavy cruisers and approximately 40 escort vessels," reported Captain Min Choi from the tactical station. Her fingers danced across targeting displays that looked primitive compared to alien technology, but they worked. "They're not even bothering with defensive formations. They think this is just another cleanup operation." Tay studied the enemy fleet through his binoculars, old-fashioned optics that couldn't be jammed or hacked. The Vorthok ships floated lazily in orbit, their crews probably celebrating another successful extermination. Down on the planet, fires burned where crystal beings had once sung their harmonic songs. "Because that's exactly what they think this is," Tay replied grimly. "Signal the fleet. Execute Operation Glass Shield." Human warships moved like wolves hunting in a pack, using tactics learned from Earth's bloodiest wars. The Busan battle. Group swept wide to hit enemy supply lines, their ships built like flying fortresses with armor thick enough to ram through asteroids. The Daegu forces went after communication relays, cutting the enemy off from reinforcements. Meanwhile, Tay's own Sol group drove straight toward the planet, where scanner readings showed crystal survivors hiding in deep cave systems. "Unknown." Vessels crackled an arrogant voice over the communication channel. "You are in violation of Galactic Council Resolution 847. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of your primitive aggression." Tay opened the channel himself, his voice carrying across space to enemy ears. "This is Admiral Tay Yoon of the Earth Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to cease all hostile actions against Kithara civilians and surrender." The response was laughter, cruel, mocking laughter that echoed through the bridge. "Primitives. From a death world dare to threaten the hegemony. You barely understand hyperspace travel. And you think you can." The transmission cut off abruptly as human railgun rounds tore through the Vorthok flagship's hull like paper. The storm had begun. Captain Da Seo crouched in the crystal caverns of Lyra 7, her combat armor scarred from 3 days of brutal fighting. The underground passages glowed with a faint blue light from the living crystal walls, but many sections had gone dark where Vorthok's sonic weapons had shattered the formations. Her squad moved carefully through the shadows, following scanner readings that showed faint life signs deeper in the cave system. Her Marines looked exhausted. They'd started with 20 soldiers when they landed on this burning world. Now only 8 remained, their faces grim behind helmet visors. But they kept moving forward, because that's what humans did. You didn't abandon people who needed help. "Contact ahead," whispered Sergeant Sanlee, raising his hand to signal the squad. His weapon was trained on movement in the shadows, ready for another ambush. They'd lost 3 Marines to Vorthok cleanup crews already, but as they rounded the corner, DA's heart nearly broke. These weren't enemy soldiers, they were survivors. Crystal beings huddled together in a small chamber, their forms dim and cracked from weeks of terror. By Kithara standards, they were barely children, their crystalline bodies no larger than human teenagers. They sang softly in the darkness, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to touch something deep in DA's soul. The music conveyed emotions, directly, hope mixing with fear, desperation tempered by the first hint of safety they'd felt in months. "We're here to help," Da said gently, removing her helmet so they could see her human face. She knew the empathic beings could sense her intentions, feel the genuine desire to protect them. "My name is Da. We're going to take you somewhere safe." The crystal children's forms grew slightly brighter, their songs shifting to notes that sounded almost like relief. One of them, barely knee-high to a human, approached cautiously and touched DA's armored hand, with fingers that felt like warm glass above them. The thunder of orbital combat shook dust from the cave ceiling. Human ships fought desperately against Vorthok reinforcements that kept arriving from across the system. The Earth fleet was tough, built to survive in the radiation-soaked space around their Deathworld home, but they were outnumbered. Captain CO Admiral Tay's voice crackled through her comm unit, distorted by interference. "We need immediate evacuation. Vorthok Fleet Command is sending everything they have. We're looking at 10-to-1 odds in 6 hours." DA looked at the crystal children gathering around her squad, their forms glowing with hope. "How many survivors?" "Total, sir. Maybe 2,000 in your sector. 8,000 across the entire planet. 10,000 lives. The last of their species." Da made her choice. The final battle above Harmony Prime would be remembered long after the last human ship went dark. Admiral Tae-Yoon stood on the bridge of the Ed Sol, watching as 200 Vorthok warships moved into attack formation around his battered fleet. He had 31 ships left, barely a quarter of what he'd started with months ago. The tactical display painted a grim picture. Red dots surrounded the few blue markers representing Earth's forces, like sharks circling wounded prey. His ships had been fighting non-stop for weeks, rescuing crystal survivors from world after burning world. They were running low on ammunition, fuel, and hope. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Vorthok Fleet Commander," reported Commander Ho Jung from the communications station. His young face was pale but determined. "They're demanding our immediate surrender." "Put them through," Tay ordered. The arrogant voice of a Vorthok admiral filled the bridge. "Human Commander, you are outnumbered 6-to-1. Surrender now, and we will allow your primitive fleet to retreat. Leave the crystal vermin behind, and you may live to see your pathetic homeworld again." Tay looked around his bridge at the faces of men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might never return. In the cargo holds below, 10,000 Kithara refugees, the last of their entire species, sang soft harmonies that somehow reached through the ship's hull. Their music gave strength to his crew, reminding them what they were fighting for. "Signal the fleet," Tay said quietly. "All ships, weapons free. Today we show the universe what it means to be human." The Soul led the charge, her railgun spitting tungsten rounds that tore through enemy hulls like paper. The smaller escort ships used their superior maneuverability to dart between the massive Vorthok dreadnoughts, targeting weak points with surgical precision. The Inchin found herself surrounded by 3 enemy cruisers. Captain Min Choi made a choice that would echo through history. Her ship accelerated to ramming speed, crashing through the lead Vorthok vessel's bridge. Her final transmission was simple: "Tell my family I died for something that mattered." The battle raged for hours. Human ships fought with desperate courage, using tactics learned from Earth's bloodiest wars. They rammed when their weapons failed, used damaged vessels as shields for the evacuation transports, and never gave ground. When the smoke cleared, only 7 human ships remained operational, but the Vorthok fleet was broken, their survivors fleeing in panic. The Crystal Children were safe, their grateful songs reaching across space itself. 6 months after the Battle of Harmony, Captain Soo Kim walked through the crystal gardens of New Cathara, watching something that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. Human children ran between towering crystal spires, laughing as they played with young Cathara, whose forms glowed with joy. The sound of their combined voices, human speech mixed with crystal harmonics, created music that made her heart ache with hope. The settlement had grown from nothing in just half a year. Human engineers worked alongside crystal shapers, creating buildings that were part metal and part living crystal. The architecture shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. 2 completely different approaches to construction had found harmony, just like the species themselves. The Galactic Council finally acted, Ambassador Li Wan said as he approached through the garden paths. His diplomatic uniform was rumpled from travel, and he looked tired but satisfied. Full economic sanctions against the Vorthok hegemony. Asset seizures, war crimes tribunals for their leadership, the whole package. Sue's expression darkened. "Only took watching us lose 24 ships and 8,000 of our best people." "But it worked," Lee insisted, his voice carrying wonder. "You should see the communications we're getting. The Altarians are asking for human military advisors. The Centaurs want to establish joint defense protocols. Species that wouldn't return our calls 6 months ago are begging for meetings." Around them, the gardens hummed with life. Crystal trees grew in spirals around human-built support structures, creating living towers that sang in the wind. Cathara adults worked with human scientists, sharing their knowledge of harmonic engineering while learning about human resilience and determination. A group of crystal children approached Sue, their forms glowing brighter as they sensed her presence. They began singing a simple melody, a human lullaby they'd learned, but transformed through their unique voices into something beautiful and strange. Human children joined in, their voices blending with crystal harmonics in ways that shouldn't be possible. "Do you think it was worth it?" Sue asked quietly, thinking of the memorial wall back on Earth that now held thousands of new names. "All those people we lost." Lee watched the children playing together, their combined voices rising toward alien stars. The song they created together carried across space itself, a promise written in music and mathematics. "Ask me in 100 years," he said softly, "when no child of any species has to sing alone in the dark, wondering if anyone cares enough to help." The harmony swelled around them, proof that sometimes the right choice costs everything, but creates something even more precious in return. The end.